You are listening to an exclusive interview on Bass Musician Magazine. The interview starts now.
Hey everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with Grammy Award-winning bassist, author, entrepreneur. Oh, this guy does so many things, hardly needs any kind of introduction, David Ellefson.
All right, how you doing?
Good, good. David, I know so many people already know about, they've been following you, they know a lot about what you've been doing, but I thought we'd take a moment just to kind of take a step back and ask, how did you get started in music and in bass?
You know, music to me, my mother was the musician of our house. My father was not. I think probably my first experience was, my mom had some Motown records and the Supremes, Neil Diamond. She had a little Beatles 45, I Want to Hold Your Hand. That was my first Beatles experience. And, cool music. We'd watch, TV, be Sonny and Cher show, these kind of things. And that was kind of probably my first exposure to music, AM radio, probably. Because I lived on a farm in Minnesota. I mean, I was 3 hours from Minneapolis, so not a lot of groundbreaking radio out in those territories in the late 60s, early 70s when I was growing up. But then I heard on the school bus radio, the bus driver started listening to WLS AM out of Chicago. And, that station started to play things that I liked, like things like Kiss, Styx, Chicago, Foreigner, things that were more hard rock, very guitar driven, guys singing rather than the Motown female singers. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, this is cool. Especially Styx had, like twin guitar leads and things like that, So all of a sudden it exposed me to a whole different thing. And I started hearing like Kiss Shout It Out Loud in particular was a song that was a game changer for me, as well as Bachman Turner Overdrive. We actually had a farmhand who worked for us on the farm growing up, and he had an 8-track of Bachman Turner Overdrive's Not Fragile. And a buddy of mine in school had the 12-inch gatefold of it. So when you opened it up, there's this great picture of BTO on stage and the lights and the drums and guitars. And I saw Fred Turner with his Rickenbacker 4001 black and white bass. And for some reason, and I don't know why, the bass, I don't even know if I really knew what it sounded like. It just looked cool. It had 4 big fat strings. It just looked cool, and then I started hearing what it sounded like, and I liked the sound of it. I mean, the BTO album, Not Fragile, opened with a bass riff that so it's like bass suddenly was in my life that I never even knew existed, and I begged my mom to buy me a Gibson bass, because on the back of the Kiss records it said, Kiss use Gibson guitars and Pearl drums because they want the best. Which I now know is an endorsement. They probably got free gear or discounts on gear, So I got a Gibson bass, a little Fender amp, and I went home and I had a Mel Bay electric bass volume 1 and 2, and I basically taught myself how to play bass. I should note that in 5th grade, I probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mom and dad, they bought a Wurlitzer organ, and it had a cassette player in it, and one of the first cassettes we had was Jesus Christ Superstar, the Andrew Lloyd Webber play. And I remember hearing it and loving it, not knowing Ian Gillan of Deep Purple. I didn't know it. I just knew it rocked. It was cool. Sounded cooler than the hymns I was hearing in church, when I'd have to go to church on Sunday. I was like, this is cool. I like this version better, Yeah. And I took organ lessons from a neighborhood church organist, ironically. And so I learned treble clef, bass clef. Also, the foot pedal was bass clef. So, you kind of learn. I learned music, I learned how to read it. I learned how to play it. I took up tenor sax in 5th grade, orchestra, not for any other reason than it just looked like the coolest instrument of the orchestra. So I took that one up, So, things looking cool are important to me. That's why I try to have my basses look cool, my straps. I think I got basses sitting over here in the corner, and when they look cool, I want to pick them up and play them.
Gotcha.
So, but that's where it all started. When I was like really, kind of between 8, 9, 10, and then at age 11, I got a bass. And by age 12, I started putting bands together with older guys. With I had an older brother, and I started hooking up with his buddies, and we started putting bands together. And I got called up to play in high school jazz band because the bass player wasn't able to play, so they called me. Another group of guys in town. I was like literally 12, 13 years old, and they were all like 16, 17, and they're calling me to play bass with them because I got good. I loved the bass. I loved playing it. I wanted to play it. I wanted to get good. I learned to read. I learned to play by ear, and I just learned to start just jamming and playing with guys. And, it's kind of what I still do today.
Fast forwarding ahead, Megadeth, how did that how did you transition to that? How did that happen?
Well, so I'm rehearsing in the farm building, where I grew up. My dad was very gracious in allowing us to kind of take over the farm and let my bands rehearse there. We always had the most space. My dad and my family were very supportive of me, as much as they looked at me like, what the hell is that music you're playing? They knew I was passionate about it. And I remember one day, I was like 16 years old, and this instinct just came to me, I got to get out to LA. I think I went in and told my parents that day, I'm going to dye my hair blonde, get an earring, and I'm going to move to LA tomorrow, which they went, yeah, all right, you're going to finish school, and you're going to, that ain't going to happen. But it quite honestly, it set the intention. Van Halen was starting to get popular from out there. I started noticing around in the next year or so, Motley Crue was starting to get some attraction. Ozzy Osbourne was starting to get the musicians for his new solo band from like Randy Rhoads and Rudy Sarzo. So as a result of those names, bands like Rat and other, LA bands started getting attention. So in my, certainly by my senior year, I made the plan, this would be 1982 and 1983, to get out to LA. So when I graduated high school in May of 1983, literally 5 days later, me and my buddies jumped in my dad gave us our family van, and we hooked up a U-Haul with all my gear in it and headed west and straight out to Hollywood. And my sort of, kind of backup plan, I wanted to do exactly what happened. What I wanted, what I dreamt of doing as a kid on a farm in Minnesota became a reality. I mean, in some ways, kind of a Hollywood Cinderella story, but I worked hard for it. It wasn't, no one showed up with a free gift. I worked hard for it. The backup plan was, well, if, a band thing doesn't work out, I can always go to, Musicians Institute, and which was very, kind of a thriving, cool vocational school at that time in the early 80s. I didn't end up going. I got accepted. I never did audition, and suddenly Megadeth formed around me. I mean, I literally moved to LA, and within a couple of days, I meet Dave, and a week or two later, we're starting Megadeth, so. Wow. But I could already play. I knew how to play. I was musically educated, so I've done fine with it without having gone to school. And I still study. I mean, I always pay attention to things. I study. I continue to try to improve and work on things all through my whole career.
Well, and interestingly enough, as if the band, that's a super achievement right there, but you've also really diversified with a lot of projects, such as the coffee company. Tell us a little about your diversification.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously Megadeth, we put in a lot of years. We've had some tremendous success with it. I've also musically stretched out to do a lot of other things with other artists, producing, playing, writing, putting out other records. So those experiences have really been good for my overall, playing and just, continued musical interest. But yeah, things like the coffee company, the record label. The record label, I think, started first, and that was really just kind of as an outlet to be able to start putting out the records I was producing myself. Mm-hmm. And then I realized I could use that as a way to help other artists to put their records out. I kind of always had this sort of altruistic kind of thread in my life that I feel like when you can give back and you can help out and you can bring your resources to the table to help others, you feel good helping them, number one, and lo and behold, you kind of get helped in the process as well. So it's kind of really a beautiful thing. And out of that, the coffee thing came. I was introduced to a coffee roaster, and quite honestly, I thought I was just going to put my name on some coffee and he was going to do all the work. And as it turns out, with pretty much everything I get involved in, I somehow end up being the one who's doing all the work, and he was wonderful. I mean, he knew coffee, and it was great. So he sort of walked me into the business. But I realized my nature is I'm a guy who starts things. I start things, I develop them, I build them. I like to have my hands on it. And so that's how the coffee company started. And to the degree that, we've got roasters around the world now, and we do all of our own labeling and distribution and online stuff. And to the degree now that kind of like the label, we can offer coffee to other artists. Like we have some signature roasts now with Autograph, Skid Row, Michael Wilton from Queensryche, who's up in your neck of the woods, who's had a coffee brand before. So yeah, it's nice, that we can, offer our resources out for other people to have the enjoyment of coffee.
Yeah, well, I don't know what I would do without coffee. Up here in the great Northwest, we take our coffee very seriously.
I love it up there. I love that about you guys. Yeah. It's awesome.
So also, since you mentioned kind of in this evolving, you're going to be kicking off a tour up in our neck of the woods in Portland in September 9th, the Bass Tour, which is the launching of your touring agency as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah. We decided to form, look, we have the label. And so in that, of course, we have our publicity, kind of an all-in services there. And, Ben, my partner Tom and I were talking about, creating. One of the hardest things for artists is to get a record out, which now we can do for them. But then we put their record out and it's like, okay, now you need a tour. And they're like, well, now getting agents and, sort of like, okay, let's form a booking agent. So we did, the ETA, which is the Ellefson touring agency. And so we formed a booking agent. And we have a handful of agents. We can do non-exclusive stuff so people don't, the whole thing in my world is I'm a musician and an artist first. So the last thing I want my friends and my artists to feel is like they're having to sign over their life to me, because I don't want that. I don't want their life. I want them to have their life. And if anything, me be the wind in the sails to help them build their lives and their career and just help them with their musical ambitions, So we thought, well, look, this is a good time to launch it around Bass Story. So yeah, the tour is starting up by you, and it spun out of I did a spoken word tour for my autobiography, My Life with Death, down in Australia back in 2015. And one of the shows, the last one I did actually in Adelaide, I'd done a handful of them, so I kind of was learning how to do the spoken word concept. And I walked out, and it was this nightclub, and everybody's sitting down, kind of relaxed in these tables and chairs. And I just sat down with my bass and just started telling stories about my life as a bass player, about some of the iconic riffs around my career, and how these songs started and how they developed. And quite honestly, that's the concept of Bass Story. It's sort of it's a storyteller concept with me with my bass in my hand, and started to invite some other musicians up to jam on stage. So these things can kind of go any number of ways, and very interactive Q&A, have some merchandising, and really make it a fun night out for the fans and for all of us.
Looking ahead, I know you've got some really cool stuff in addition to the Bass Story tour coming in the near future. What are you working on?
Well, it's funny, the tour, starting up by you, then we're also going to go down to Texas. Actually have some Midwest dates we're about ready to announce, as well as some dates in Europe. So this is really turning into a kind of my own solo bass venture, without it having to be just a solo bass concert. It can be that as well as kind of the storyteller thing. Also have the Metal Allegiance album on Nuclear Blast is coming out in September, so we're going to do a show in New York around that. Frank Bello and I from Anthrax. We have our band Altitudes and Attitude, which is just it's funny, two bass players getting together, writing some songs. Frank sings, he plays guitar, I play guitar, we both play bass. My 10-string bass that I just showed you before we started the interview from Jackson. Sometimes, necessity is the mother of invention. It's been really nice with Jackson because I've worked with them on a lot of collaborations. Back when we did the Rust in Peace album, I recorded the song Hangar 18. And I recorded it, kind of with a drop tuning on a 4-string. And then I realized, oh, man, I got to go on tour and play this song. So I went to Jackson, and we invented the first ever Jackson 5-string bass. It's my signature bass. I got a 4 and a 5, but that 5-string is my main instrument I use on stage, and we've done a few different models of it. I wanted a bass that kind of hung a little lower and felt a little more rock and roll, so invented the Kelly Bird bass with them. I also asked them if we could do a double neck so I could have a guitar and a bass, so we just built a custom shop double neck, and now we just did the 10-string. And then the 10-string, basically, it's picture an 8-string bass, but because I'm a 5-string player, I need the extra string, so now we add 2 more, so it becomes 10-string. And I actually just did some recording with it this week. Sounds incredible, and it's just, I basically had that bass made for me and Frank and Altitudes and Attitudes, because a lot of that record is recorded with 8 and now 10-string bass. Again, sometimes needs call out, and fortunately I can call out to Jackson and say, help, I need a bass. And they've got an incredible custom shop and a great team of just innovative, forward-thinking guys, and they're up for the challenge. Probably the hardest thing with the 10-string was getting a bridge. Then once we got the bridge dialed in, the rest of it was all, pretty easy. So it's really cool. I feel Jackson and I walk hand in hand down most of my career together, so it's really been great to have a partnership with them.
And are there any other significant parts of your gear that give you your iconic sound?
Well, certainly Harkey. Initially when I started using Harkey, I went into a Guitar Center on Sunset in 87, I think it was. I picked a Jackson guitar off the wall, plugged it into a Gallien-Kruger 800 RB, which is a great head, and into some, I think a pair of Harkey, I think it was a 410 and a single 15, the all-aluminum speakers. And my tone was basically born right there. Now, I recorded Killing Is My Business and Peace Out, so obviously already had a, kind of a tone in place with some BC Rich instruments and sort of these hodgepodge of amplifiers. Basically amplifiers that I sort of built out of my PA that I owned in Minnesota. I brought my PA out to LA and kind of built a bass amp out of it. That's what I was using on those early, Megadeth recordings and touring. Then the Harkey speakers and now the Harkey amps, the LH1000s. I mean, the Harkey with the Jackson is absolutely, the cornerstone of my tone. And the SIT power wound strings that I use are the same thing. I mean, there's just an incredible toughness and boldness to that tone. I use the Jim Dunlop Tortex picks. I use usually the green one, which is I think a .88 gauge. So those are really key elements of my tone. And they're sort of like paintbrushes I can grab out of the easel that never talk back and give me problems. Because I like to tell the instrument and the amp what to do with my hands. Because really, all the music and the tone is really in your hands. So I just need an instrument that's going to basically, it's kind of like a megaphone or a microphone. When you speak into it, it should still sound like you, but just be louder. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I look at my bass and my strings and my amps. It's me, but it's just making me speak a little louder.
Well, and with all this stuff that you're involved with, the best place, if people want to know, like they want to catch you on tour, should they look at davidellefson.com?
Yeah, davidellefson.com, obviously Megadeth.com for Megadeth activities, and, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and all the other places. EMPLabelGroup.com as well as on all the social media, and also for Ellefson Coffee Co. is our handle over there for coffee.
Very cool. Well, we appreciate you taking time from such a busy schedule, David, and chatting with us. People, you've seen him here doing so much stuff, it's hard to squeeze into just one interview. David Ellefson on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks for bassing out with us here on bassmusicianmagazine.com.